the most insufferable genius. Imagine being so irritating that your own mother writes you a letter saying you're highly annoying and unbearable to live with. Now imagine that same person becomes one of the most influential philosophers in history, shaping the thoughts of Nietzsche, Freud, Einstein, Tolstoy, and countless others. That's Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher his mother couldn't stand, and today we're diving into his fascinating, miserable, and surprisingly relevant philosophy. Let me read you part of an actual letter Johanna Schopenhauer wrote to her son Arthur on November 6, 1807, when he was just 19 years old. "You are not an evil human. You are not without intellect and education. You have everything that could make you a credit to human society. Moreover, I am acquainted with your heart and know that few are better, but you are nevertheless irritating and unbearable, and I consider it most difficult to live with you. All of your good qualities become obscured by your super-cleverness and are made useless to the world merely because of your rage at wanting to know everything better than others, of wanting to improve and master what you cannot command. With this you embitter the people around you, since no one wants to be improved or enlightened in such a forceful way, least of all by such an insignificant individual as you still are. If you were less like you would only be ridiculous, but thus as you are highly annoying." This is one of the most savage letters a mother has ever written to her son, and it sets the tone for understanding Schopenhauer. He was brilliant, no question. But he was also arrogant, pessimistic, misanthropic, and genuinely difficult to be around. And somehow, all of these qualities shaped his philosophy in profound ways. Arthur Schopenhauer was born in 1788 in Danzig, now Gdansk, Poland, into a wealthy merchant family. His father, Heinrich, was a successful businessman who wanted Arthur to follow in his footsteps. His mother, Johanna, was a socialite and novelist who became quite famous in her own right, hosting literary salons in Weimar where she entertained Goethe and other luminaries. From the beginning, Arthur didn't fit in. His childhood was marked by extensive travels across Europe as his father tried to groom him for the merchant life. Arthur was miserable. He was intellectually precocious, moody, and already showing signs of the pessimism that would define his philosophy. He saw suffering everywhere, in poverty, in illness, in the futility of human striving. And he couldn't understand why everyone else seemed so cheerfully oblivious to it. When Arthur was 17, his father died, possibly by suicide, though the circumstances were unclear. This freed Arthur from the obligation to become a merchant, but it also deepened his dark worldview. He studied medicine and philosophy at the universities of Göttingen and Berlin, where he was profoundly influenced by Plato and especially by Kant. But he was also increasingly alienated from academic philosophy, which he saw as verbose, obscure, and divorced from the real business of understanding human existence. Schopenhauer's relationship with his mother deteriorated rapidly after his father's death. Johanna was enjoying her newfound independence and social life. Arthur was gloomy, critical, and constantly lecturing her and her guests about the meaninglessness of their pursuits. He disapproved of her lifestyle, criticized her friends, and generally made himself unbearable. The letter I quoted earlier was written during this period, and it captures the essence of their conflict. Johanna was basically saying, "You're smart, you're not a bad person, but you're so convinced of your own superiority and so determined to tell everyone how wrong they are that nobody can stand you." And she was right. Schopenhauer never changed. He spent his entire life convinced that he was the only philosopher who truly understood reality, that all his contemporaries were frauds, and that the world would eventually recognize his genius. Spoiler alert, it took decades, but eventually they did. In 1818, at the age of 30, Schopenhauer published his masterwork, The World as Will and Representation. He was convinced it would revolutionize philosophy. It didn't. Almost nobody read it. The few copies that sold gathered dust. Reviewers ignored it. This sent Schopenhauer into a spiral of bitterness that lasted the rest of his life. He became obsessed with his rival Hegel, who was enormously popular at the time. Schopenhauer called Hegel a charlatan, a clumsy charlatan, whose philosophy was incomprehensible nonsense designed to impress rather than enlighten. He even scheduled his lectures at the University of Berlin at the same time as Hegel's, convinced that students would choose his clear, honest philosophy over Hegel's obfuscation. They didn't. Schopenhauer's lectures were empty. He quit academia in humiliation. He spent the rest of his life in Frankfurt, living as a recluse with his succession of poodles, all named Atma, which means world soul in Sanskrit. He ate lunch alone at the same restaurant every day. He was terrified of disease and social unrest. He slept with loaded pistols by his bed. He was hostile to women, writing misogynistic screeds that are shocking even by 19th century standards. He had almost no friends. And he spent decades writing essays, revising his magnum opus, and waiting for the world to recognize his genius. And then, in the 1850s, when Schopenhauer was in his 60s, something miraculous happened. People started reading him. His essays became popular. Universities started teaching his work. Suddenly, the bitter old man with the poodle was being called one of the greatest philosophers of the century. Schopenhauer finally got the recognition he'd craved his entire life, and he spent his last years in something approaching contentment, savoring his belated triumph. He died in 1860, leaving behind a philosophy that's simultaneously one of the darkest and most compelling in the Western tradition. And that philosophy, as we'll see, is inseparable from the peculiar, difficult, brilliant man who created it. Part 2, The World as Will. Life is Suffering. So what did Schopenhauer actually believe? What was the philosophy that nobody wanted to hear for 30 years and then suddenly couldn't get enough of? At its core, Schopenhauer's philosophy is an answer to a simple question. What is the fundamental nature of reality? And his answer is as bleak as it is original. Reality is will, and will is suffering. Schopenhauer starts with Kant. Kant had argued that we never experience things as they really are, things in themselves. We only experience phenomena, things as they appear to us, filtered through the categories of our minds, space, time, causality. The real nature of reality, the noumenal realm, is unknowable. But Schopenhauer thinks Kant was too pessimistic. There is one way we can access the thing in itself, and that's through introspection, by looking inward at our own nature. When you examine yourself deeply, what do you find? Not reason, not consciousness, not a soul in the traditional sense. You find will. Constant striving, desiring, wanting. You're hungry, so you want food. You get food, but then you want something else. You want comfort, pleasure, success, love, recognition. And even when you get what you want, the satisfaction is fleeting. Soon you're wanting something else, or wanting more of the same thing, or wanting to keep what you have. You're never satisfied. You're always striving. This isn't just true of you as a conscious individual. Schopenhauer argues it's true of your entire being. Your body is will. Your heart wills to beat. Your lungs will to breathe. Your cells will to reproduce. Even your unconscious drives and instincts are manifestations of will. And here's the radical part. This will isn't personal. It's not your individual will. It's the will, capital W, the fundamental force of the universe, expressing itself through you. Everything in nature is will. Animals will to survive and reproduce. Plants will to grow toward the sun. Even inanimate objects express will through forces like gravity and magnetism. The entire universe is one blind, purposeless, insatiable will, endlessly striving without aim or fulfillment. And we're just temporary manifestations of this cosmic force, driven by desires we didn't choose and can't ultimately satisfy. Now here's where Schopenhauer's pessimism really kicks in. If reality is fundamentally will, and will is endless striving, then life is necessarily suffering. Why? Because desire is suffering. When you want something and don't have it, you suffer from lack. When you get what you want, the pleasure is brief, and then you either suffer from boredom or you're already wanting the next thing. It's a trap. Fulfillment is impossible because will by its nature can never be satisfied. It just keeps wanting. Schopenhauer puts it starkly, life oscillates between pain and boredom. When we're striving for something, we suffer from the pain of unfulfilled desire. When we achieve what we wanted, we briefly feel pleasure, but this quickly fades into boredom, which is its own form of suffering. So we seek new desires to escape boredom, which plunges us back into the pain of striving. This cycle never ends. Life is essentially suffering, punctuated by brief moments of relief that we mistake for happiness. And it's not just humans. All life suffers. Animals suffer. They're driven by blind instincts to survive and reproduce, constantly struggling, constantly in conflict with each other. Nature is a war of all against all, with every creature trying to satisfy its will at the expense of others. Schopenhauer was deeply influenced by Eastern philosophy, particularly Buddhism and Hinduism, and his vision of universal suffering echoes the Buddhist teaching that life is dukkha, unsatisfactoriness or suffering. But Schopenhauer goes further than Buddhism in some ways. He doesn't just say life involves suffering. He says existence itself is a mistake. It would have been better if nothing had ever existed. The will bringing forth this world of endless striving and suffering was a cosmic tragedy. Non-existence is preferable to existence. This is pessimism taken to its logical extreme, and it shocked Schopenhauer's contemporaries, who were steeped in Christian optimism and Enlightenment faith in progress. Most philosophers argued that reality is fundamentally rational, that history has a purpose, that human beings are progressing toward greater knowledge and happiness. Hegel, Schopenhauer's nemesis, built an entire system around the idea that history is the rational unfolding of spirit toward self-consciousness and freedom. Schopenhauer thought this was all delusion. There's no cosmic purpose. There's no progress. There's just will blindly churning out generations of suffering creatures who are born, suffer, reproduce, and die, to be replaced by new generations who will suffer in turn. The universe doesn't care about you. It doesn't even know you exist. You're just a temporary expression of an impersonal force that has no goals and no concern for your well-being. This sounds unbearably dark, and it is. But here's what's interesting. Schopenhauer wasn't trying to make people miserable. He thought he was offering liberation. If you understand that suffering is built into the structure of existence, that it comes from the nature of will itself, then you stop blaming yourself or others for your unhappiness. You see that everyone is trapped in the same predicament. This should generate compassion, not cynicism. We're all suffering together, all driven by the same blind will, all struggling in the same futile way. And more importantly, if you understand the nature of will, you can potentially escape its dominance. That's what the rest of Schopenhauer's philosophy is about. How to minimize suffering and achieve some measure of peace in a fundamentally tragic existence. And that's what we'll explore next. Part 3, Escape Routes, Art, Compassion, and Denial of Will. So we're stuck in a universe ruled by blind, insatiable will, doomed to suffer. Is there any hope? Schopenhauer says yes, but the solutions are difficult and temporary. He offers 3 main escape routes from suffering: aesthetic contemplation, compassion, and asceticism. Let's look at each. First, aesthetic contemplation. When you experience great art, something remarkable happens. For a moment you stop willing. You're not desiring anything. You're not thinking about your needs or goals. You're simply contemplating, absorbed in the artwork. You're experiencing what Schopenhauer calls pure will-less perception. And in that state, you're temporarily free from suffering. This is why art is so important for Schopenhauer. It's not just entertainment or decoration. It's one of the few ways to escape the tyranny of will. When you're absorbed in a beautiful piece of music, a great painting, or a profound poem, you transcend your individual will and enter a state of pure contemplation. You're no longer caught in the cycle of wanting and striving. You're simply perceiving beauty for its own sake. Different arts achieve this in different ways. Architecture presents the will objectified in matter, struggling against gravity. Sculpture and painting capture the eternal forms of things, allowing us to see beyond individual objects to their essential nature. But music is the highest art for Schopenhauer because it doesn't represent the world at all. Music is a direct copy of the will itself, expressing the fundamental striving and movement of reality without mediation. This is why music moves us so deeply. It speaks directly to our innermost being. But aesthetic experience is temporary. Eventually the concert ends, you leave the museum, you close the book, and you're back in the world of willing and suffering. So while art provides crucial relief, it's not a permanent solution. The second escape route is compassion. Remember, we're all expressions of the same universal will. The boundaries between individuals are illusions created by our perception of space and time. At a deeper level, we're all one. When you truly understand this, when you feel it, you experience genuine compassion. The suffering of others is literally your own suffering because there's no ultimate distinction between you and them. Schopenhauer bases his entire ethics on compassion. The only genuine moral motivation is feeling another's suffering as your own. When you help someone out of compassion, you're not following rules or calculating consequences. You're recognizing your fundamental identity with them. Their pain is your pain. This is why compassion is the foundation of all genuine virtue, and why cruelty is the ultimate vice. It denies the underlying unity of all existence. This is a remarkable ethical theory, very different from dominant Western approaches. It's not based on reason or divine commands or social contracts. It's based on direct intuition of metaphysical truth. And it has real implications. If we're all one at the deepest level, then harming others is literally harming yourself. Selfishness is based on ignorance of reality. Compassion is based on wisdom. But compassion, while important, still operates within the world of will. You're still an individual alleviating the suffering of other individuals. The fundamental problem remains. So Schopenhauer proposes a third, most radical solution: denial of the will to live. This is Schopenhauer's version of Buddhist enlightenment or Christian sainthood. The idea is to progressively weaken and ultimately extinguish your will entirely. You stop desiring. You renounce pleasure. You practice asceticism, chastity, voluntary poverty. You withdraw from the world and from your own individuality. In the most extreme cases, you might even welcome death as the final liberation from willing and suffering. This sounds incredibly extreme, and it is. Schopenhauer is essentially advocating for a kind of living death, a state where you exist but have no desires, no attachment to life, no individual will. You've achieved what he calls the denial of the will to live. You're still biologically alive, but the will has been extinguished in you. You've achieved liberation, what Buddhism calls nirvana. Schopenhauer doesn't claim he achieved this himself. He admits he was too attached to life, too driven by his own will for recognition and intellectual accomplishment. But he describes saints and ascetics who have achieved it, and he clearly sees this as the highest human achievement, the only true escape from suffering. Most readers find this disturbing. It seems like Schopenhauer is advocating for a kind of spiritual suicide, a rejection of everything that makes life meaningful: desire, ambition, relationships, pleasure. And there's truth to this criticism. Schopenhauer's philosophy taken to its logical extreme does seem to point toward non-existence as the ultimate good. But Schopenhauer would say that's because non-existence is better than existence. The real problem is that we're attached to life, that we fear death and non-being. But this attachment is irrational. It comes from the blind will driving us to survive and reproduce. If we could see clearly, we'd recognize that the best thing would be for the will to extinguish itself entirely, for the world to cease existing. This is profoundly nihilistic in one sense, but in another sense, it's oddly liberating. If you accept that life is suffering and that the highest achievement is to minimize and eventually extinguish desire, then you're free from all the anxieties that plague most people. You don't need to achieve success, accumulate wealth, gain recognition, or even be happy. Those are all manifestations of will, and will is the problem, not the solution. Schopenhauer's philosophy gives you permission to opt out of the entire game. You can stop chasing happiness, stop comparing yourself to others, stop worrying about your legacy. You can simply exist, minimally and quietly, causing as little suffering as possible and gradually weakening your attachment to life. It's a grim vision, but for some people, it's strangely comforting. Part 4. Influence and Legacy, the Philosopher Who Changed Everything. For 30 years, almost nobody read Schopenhauer. Then, in the last decade of his life, everything changed. Suddenly he was everywhere. His essays were popular. His philosophy was being discussed in universities and literary salons. And after his death in 1860, his influence exploded. Within a few decades, Schopenhauer had become one of the most influential philosophers in history, shaping art, literature, psychology, and even science. Let's look at how. First, Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche discovered Schopenhauer as a young man and was profoundly influenced by him. Schopenhauer's pessimism, his emphasis on will, his critique of rationalism, and his atheism all shaped Nietzsche's thinking. But Nietzsche ultimately rejected Schopenhauer's solution. Where Schopenhauer advocated denying the will, Nietzsche said we should embrace it, affirm life in all its suffering, say yes to existence. Nietzsche's will to power is a transformation of Schopenhauer's will, and his whole philosophy can be seen as a response to Schopenhauer. What if we take Schopenhauer's metaphysics but reject his pessimism and asceticism? Sigmund Freud was deeply influenced by Schopenhauer, though he rarely acknowledged it. Schopenhauer's idea that most of our mental life is unconscious, driven by irrational forces we don't understand, prefigures Freud's theory of the unconscious. Schopenhauer's will is essentially Freud's idea, the blind, instinctual drive for satisfaction that underlies conscious thought. Schopenhauer even discussed sexual drives as the most powerful expression of will, anticipating Freud's emphasis on sexuality. Freud's entire project of psychoanalysis, bringing unconscious drives to consciousness, has Schopenhauerian roots. Carl Jung was also influenced. Jung's concept of the collective unconscious, a deeper level of psyche shared by all humans, echoes Schopenhauer's idea that beneath individual consciousness lies the universal will. And Jung's emphasis on integrating the shadow, acknowledging the dark parts of ourselves, reflects Schopenhauer's insistence that we must confront the irrational, suffering nature of existence. In literature, Schopenhauer's influence is enormous. Tolstoy called him the greatest philosopher and incorporated his ideas into works like Anna Karenina and The Death of Ivan Ilyich, where characters confront the meaninglessness of conventional life and seek spiritual liberation. Thomas Mann was profoundly influenced, especially in works like The Magic Mountain and Death in Venice. Marcel Proust's exploration of memory, time, and the nature of self has Schopenhauerian themes. Even Jorge Luis Borges, Samuel Beckett, and countless other writers drew on Schopenhauer's dark vision. In music, Richard Wagner was Schopenhauer's most famous devotee. Wagner discovered Schopenhauer in 1854 and was transformed. His later operas, especially Tristan and Isolde and Parsifal, are deeply Schopenhauerian. Tristan is about the impossibility of fulfillment in life and the longing for death as release. Parsifal explores compassion and renunciation. Wagner even sent Schopenhauer a copy of The Ring Cycle, hoping for approval. Schopenhauer never responded, which is hilariously on brand for both of them. Composers like Brahms, Mahler, and Schoenberg were also influenced. Schopenhauer's philosophy of music as the direct expression of will shaped how these composers thought about their art. And his pessimism resonated with the late Romantic sensibility, the sense that modernity was hollow and that true depth required confronting suffering and meaninglessness. In philosophy, Schopenhauer's influence extends beyond Nietzsche. The existentialists, particularly Sartre and Camus, grappled with Schopenhauerian themes: the absurdity of existence, the search for meaning in a meaningless universe, the confrontation with nothingness. Schopenhauer's atheistic pessimism prefigures existential philosophy. Even analytical philosophers engaged with Schopenhauer. Wittgenstein admired him, and Schopenhauer's ideas about the limits of language and the mystical appear in the Tractatus. Beyond philosophy, Schopenhauer influenced early evolutionary biology and psychology. His emphasis on unconscious drives and the primacy of irrational forces over reason challenged Enlightenment assumptions about human nature. Darwin's theory of natural selection, published shortly before Schopenhauer's death, seemed to confirm Schopenhauer's vision of nature as blind, purposeless striving. There's no cosmic purpose to evolution, just endless, meaningless competition for survival, exactly what Schopenhauer had been saying. In contemporary times, Schopenhauer's influence persists. Philosophers like Thomas Nagel explore Schopenhauerian questions about the subjective nature of experience and the limits of objective knowledge. David Benatar's antinatalism, the view that it's wrong to bring new people into existence because life is necessarily more suffering than pleasure, is explicitly Schopenhauerian. And in popular culture, Schopenhauer's pessimism resonates with anyone who feels disillusioned with modern life's empty promises of happiness through consumption, success, and technology. Schopenhauer also appeals to people interested in Eastern philosophy. He was one of the first major Western philosophers to seriously engage with Buddhism and Hinduism, seeing profound truths in their teachings about suffering and liberation. This helped pave the way for the West's later interest in Eastern thought. Today, mindfulness, meditation, and Buddhist-influenced psychotherapy owe something to Schopenhauer's bridge between East and West. So the insufferable genius his mother couldn't stand ended up changing how we think about reality, consciousness, art, ethics, and the meaning of life. Not bad for someone whose lectures nobody attended. Part 5. Why Schopenhauer Still Matters. We've covered Schopenhauer's life, his philosophy of will and suffering, his proposed escapes through art and asceticism, and his massive influence. But why should you care about Schopenhauer today? What makes this gloomy 19th century pessimist relevant in the 21st century? First, Schopenhauer offers an antidote to toxic positivity. We live in a culture obsessed with happiness. Self-help books promise fulfillment. Social media presents curated lives of constant joy. Advertising tells us the right products will make us happy. And when we inevitably fail to be happy all the time, we blame ourselves. We think something's wrong with us. Schopenhauer says no. Suffering isn't a bug in the system. It's the system itself. Life is difficult, desires are often unfulfilled, and even when we get what we want, satisfaction is fleeting. This isn't your fault. It's the nature of existence. And there's something liberating about this. If you stop expecting life to make you constantly happy, you can stop being disappointed. You can accept suffering as part of the deal and stop wasting energy trying to eliminate it entirely. Second, Schopenhauer's philosophy helps us understand desire and consumerism. Capitalism depends on keeping us in a state of perpetual wanting. Advertising creates desires, products promise satisfaction, but fulfillment is always just out of reach. Buy this and you'll be happy. Get that promotion and you'll feel complete. Achieve this body and you'll be confident. But it never works. We get the thing, feel briefly pleased, then want the next thing. We're on a hedonic treadmill, exactly as Schopenhauer described. Understanding this doesn't mean you have to become an ascetic, but it can help you see through the manipulation. When you recognize that desire itself is the trap, not the failure to satisfy particular desires, you can make more conscious choices about what you pursue and why. You can distinguish between genuine needs and manufactured wants. You can opt out of some of the game. Third, Schopenhauer's emphasis on compassion is profoundly relevant. In a world of increasing polarization, where we constantly divide into us versus them, Schopenhauer reminds us that these divisions are ultimately illusory. We're all expressions of the same reality, all suffering in similar ways, all trapped in the same existential predicament. This should generate compassion, not judgment. When you truly grasp this, it becomes harder to demonize others, easier to forgive, more natural to help. Fourth, Schopenhauer's philosophy of art speaks to why we need beauty and creativity. In a utilitarian age that asks what everything is for, Schopenhauer gives us an answer for art. It's one of the few things that allows us to transcend the constant cycle of wanting and striving. Art isn't a luxury. It's necessary for human well-being, offering temporary liberation from the will. This validates the importance of aesthetic experience in a culture that often reduces everything to economic or practical value. Fifth, Schopenhauer forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the meaning of life. Most philosophy tries to find meaning, purpose, or redemption. Schopenhauer says, what if there isn't any? What if existence is fundamentally meaningless, just blind while churning itself out for no reason? This is terrifying, but it's also oddly freeing. If there's no cosmic purpose, then you're not failing to fulfill it. You can create your own meaning, or you can simply exist without needing to justify your existence. Either way, you're not answerable to some grand narrative about what life is supposed to be. Sixth, Schopenhauer's pessimism might actually be more psychologically healthy than optimism in certain contexts. Research suggests that defensive pessimism, expecting things to go wrong and preparing for it, can reduce anxiety and improve performance. Schopenhauer essentially advocates for this approach to life. Expect suffering. Accept that things won't go as planned. Stop being surprised when life is difficult. This doesn't mean being miserable. It means being realistic, which paradoxically can lead to greater peace. Seventh, Schopenhauer's synthesis of Eastern and Western philosophy remains valuable. He showed that radically different philosophical traditions can address similar truths about human existence. His work encouraged the West to take Eastern thought seriously, not as exotic mysticism but as profound philosophy. In our globalized world, this kind of cross-cultural philosophical dialogue is more important than ever. Finally, Schopenhauer matters because he was honest. He looked at existence unflinchingly and reported what he saw, even when it was bleak. He didn't sugarcoat reality or invent comforting illusions. This radical honesty is rare and valuable. Even if you disagree with his conclusions, you have to respect his courage in following his logic wherever it led, regardless of whether the destination was pleasant. So should you become a Schopenhauerian? Probably not entirely. His misogyny was inexcusable. His misanthropy was excessive. His solution of ascetic renunciation appeals to very few. And his pessimism, while containing insights, can become paralyzing if taken too far. But you can learn from Schopenhauer without accepting everything he said. You can recognize that life involves suffering without concluding that existence is a mistake. You can appreciate the liberating power of art without thinking it's the only escape from cosmic horror. You can practice compassion based on recognizing our fundamental unity without believing we're all manifestations of blind will. You can face reality honestly without giving up on joy, connection, and meaning. Schopenhauer is valuable precisely because he's extreme. He pushes certain insights to their logical conclusions, showing you what they look like when taken seriously. And even if you ultimately reject those conclusions, the journey is worthwhile. Philosophy isn't just about finding the right answers. It's about grappling with hard questions, challenging your assumptions, and thinking deeply about what it means to be human. And Schopenhauer, the insufferable genius his mother couldn't stand, the bitter old man with the poodle who waited decades for recognition, forces you to do exactly that. He makes you think. He disturbs you. He challenges every comforting belief about progress, happiness, and meaning. And in doing so, he offers something precious: the possibility of seeing reality clearly without illusion, and finding some measure of peace within that clear-eyed vision. That's the paradox of Schopenhauer. His philosophy is profoundly dark, yet reading him can be strangely uplifting. When you stop expecting the universe to make sense or life to be fair, when you accept suffering as inevitable and abandon the quest for permanent happiness, something shifts. The pressure releases. You can breathe. You can simply exist, moment by moment, finding what beauty and compassion you can, without needing everything to add up to some grand meaningful narrative. Maybe his mother was right. Maybe Schopenhauer was highly annoying. But he was also brilliant, honest, and utterly unique. And philosophy would be much poorer without him.